Hello and welcome to Post to Post, the channel where we discuss all things hockey and all teams. It's playoff time and we're back for another video. It's St. Louis versus Minnesota. And this is a very interesting matchup here. We almost saw a couple different matchups for Minnesota. Nashville almost snuck in. But here we have it, Minnesota versus St. Louis, and this should be an interesting one. So I'm just going to quickly go through the seasonal stats between these two. So goals for was 266 for Minnesota, 235 for St. Louis. Goals against is 208 for Minnesota and 218 for St. Louis. The differential for Minnesota is plus 58. The differential for St. Louis is plus 17. If we move on to the home record, there Minnesota has a 27-12-2. St. Louis has a 24-12-5. Away record for Minnesota is 22-13-6, and for St. Louis it's 22-17-2. The penalty kill for Minnesota is 21%, and St. Louis is right there with them at 21.3. If we move on to penalty kill, Minnesota's at an 82.9, and St. Louis is at an 84.8, which is pretty impressive. So St. Louis's special teams here are really kicking Minnesota's butt, but all the other statistics go in Minnesota's favor. So how do you, just very quickly, are you excited for this series?
Yeah, I am. And I was actually happy that we weren't starting out this year in the playoffs with St. Louis and Chicago. And I was really excited for this matchup, to be honest. So
yeah,
looking forward to it.
It's going to be really good. So let's just move on to the ranking system that we have in place. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I wanted to pick 6 key categories that I felt could really bring every player from the team into one of these categories. So the 6 categories will be offense, defense, goaltending, grit, speed, and overall experience. So regardless of your age, position, or what line you play on, you will fall into one of these 6 categories. So I thought this would really break down a team properly. So I'm going to start with Minnesota, and I'm going to tackle their offense. Now, Minnesota this year was 5th in win percentage, so not too shabby for them. They had 4 guys with over 20 goals this year. And for me, the real story in Minnesota is Eric Staal this year. That guy is full-on rejuvenated his career in Minnesota. The poor guy couldn't get really anything done with the Rangers. He goes to Minnesota, and now he's doing amazing things, and he's putting up, well, to me, it's a career year. Yeah, he did hit 100 points before, but since then, he hasn't been the same guy. And this year in Minnesota, you'd swear he was 10 years younger.
Yeah.
He played amazing. So for me, I gave him a 3.5 from 5.
You know what? I went the full 5 stars. I think they had the second most goals for in the league. Yeah, I went there. I went 5 stars. I think they had the second most goals for in the league. And I think out of all the teams, minus maybe Pittsburgh and Chicago, I think they have the most depth scoring on the team. So, full 5 for me for offense.
Yeah, well, actually, if I remember correctly, I believe Minnesota was second in the league in goals for. Who would have predicted that?
Yeah.
I wouldn't have, that's for sure. Now, defense for Minnesota. They were 7th in goals against. They were 8th on the penalty kill. They have a solid blue line, in my opinion, but to me, they're not necessarily the most experienced blue line. I mean, yeah, they have Suter. That guy has done, amazing things internationally and so on. He's a very experienced guy, but to me, I wish that their blue line was a little bit more on the experience side of things. So 3 on 5 for me.
Well, don't worry, I didn't give them 5 for this. I dropped it down to a 4. I think they're still pretty defensively responsible. Like you mentioned with Suter, one of the best defensemen in the league.
Oh, yeah.
So 4 out of 5 for me.
Nice. So goaltending. Jeez. Dubnyk, he's had an amazing year this year, right? There's not really anything bad that you can say about Dubnyk. Now, his goals against average this year was a 225. His save percentage was a 923, and he had 5 shutouts this year. So Dubnyk has had basically a career year for me. However, I find that Dubnyk has taken on the full responsibility of the crease for Minnesota. And again, could it be to the point where Dubnyk could be tiring out a little bit, maybe, going into the playoffs? Tough to say. So I gave a 3 on 5.
I like what you said there. He does look a little tired, and it does concern me a little bit. But I think that Dubnyk is I think mentally he'll get better as soon as the playoffs start. I'm not too worried about him, but I dropped it down to a 4, even though he's been the second best goalie, I would say probably this year. 4 out of 5.
Nice. So grit, this is what really hurt them for me. I gave a 2.5. Now, they had 2 guys on the club with over 100 hits. 100 hits is a lot of hits in the run of a season. Now, there were teams in the NHL that had 12, 15 guys with over 100 hits for their team. Minnesota only had 2 with over 100 hits. And I felt that going up against St. Louis to me is a more physical team. They're a bigger team in a lot of aspects. And I feel that Minnesota is going to have a tough time matching the grit from St. Louis. So a 2.5 for me.
Yeah, they're definitely not the most grittiest team in the league, but they do have some grit, and I'd say pretty deep grit. It's just not really overwhelming. So I gave them 3.5 stars out of 5.
So speed, I gave them a 3 out of 5. They have 8 guys with over 30 takeaways this year. 8. So that's quite impressive to me. They're not as fast as some teams in the West by any stretch, but they're not the slowest either, that's for sure. So 3 on 5 for me.
You know what? I give them 3.5 out of 5. I think they do have some pretty speedy guys, and I'll leave it at that.
Nice. So overall experience, I did 3 on 5. Again, boy, I like 3 on 5s, don't I? So again, they do have some key guys that have some solid experience on the club, but again, there's a lot of inexperience in a lot of key areas for the team. So 3 on 5 for me.
I gave 2.5. I don't think they've been past the second round since they came into the league, and not very many times past the first round. Maybe they haven't even been past the first round. I honestly can't remember. All right, so let's add these up and see how we did.
So for Minnesota, I finished at 18 of 30.
And for Minnesota, I finished at 22.5 out of 30, so pretty big discrepancy there.
Yeah, this might be the first one where
I feel like you were pretty harsh with Minnesota.
I was. I really was. I'm sorry. Going into the season, to me, at this point, I think Minnesota has overachieved a little bit. I wouldn't have predicted them to be where they are. I'm sorry.
All right, no problem. All right, let's move on to St. Louis, shall we?
Yes. So St. Louis. Now, I have some notes on St. Louis that I wanted to share. St. Louis, let's start with their offense. Now, they were 10th in win percentage. So they're in the top 10 in win percentage. So to me, that was a huge thing. They have 2 guys, though, with over 20 goals. Only 2. So that kind of hurt them a little bit. And I also noted here that Tarasenko can't score them all, right? Tarasenko's the guy that they lean on big time in order to bring goal scoring to their club. I mean, hey, the guy brings it, right? But they really need some depth for goal scoring. So I think I was generous when I gave them a 3 on 5.
I completely agree with everything you said there. 3 out of 5 is for me as well. Tarasenko is by far the most offensively gifted person on the team. And, there's other guys on the team who can score as well, but man, there's a lot of pressure on his shoulders to put the puck in the net.
Big time. So defense, they were 3rd on the penalty kill this year, being in the top 3 on the PK. That's huge. The loss of Shattenkirk, I think, still stings quite a bit. He was definitely the leader on that blue line, and him leaving, boy, that really put a dent into things. And that's what really hurt my ranking here for the defense, and I gave a 3 on 5.
I gave a 3 as well. I think Pietrangelo had 19 points in his last 17 games after Shattenkirk left, so that's a good sign for St. Louis and their fans. But I honestly think they're a bit inconsistent sometimes, and that worries me, so 3 out of 5.
Nice. So goaltending. Now, this is going to be the area, I think, where I'm going to give the lowest ranking. I only gave them a 2.5 out of 5. And you look back a little earlier in the year with Jake Allen, he had that little shaky stretch, and they sent him down for some conditioning and then brought him back up. If he's the guy that they're really going to lean on going into the playoffs, boy, I'm a little iffy on him right now. And he's almost kind of going the way of Marc-Andre Fleury, where he's stellar for a month and all of a sudden he's a little shaky for a while. And, I'm really questioning my confidence in him as the starting guy for St. Louis. And, if he is the go-to, I don't know. I'm a little shaky on it, so 2.5.
Yeah, I can't really argue with that too much. Jake Allen had a rough start to the year, and then he turned it around. He's had a lot of ups and downs this year, very high ups and very low lows. And he had a very in-depth chat with Brodeur, I think, for a while off the ice, and which helped him tremendously, as we can see from his recent play. And I had to give them 3 out of 5. I wanted to give them 4 because I think Jake Allen's one of the most acrobatic goalies in the league, but I kept it at 3.
Consistency. Keyword. They got to have consistency in net if they're going to go far. Grit. They had 3 guys with over 100 hits this year. And to me, they are hands down the more gritty team compared to Minnesota. So I get 3.5 out of 5 stars here. They do have some guys that can really bring in the physical department. And to me, St. Louis is a really big team when you look at some key guys here. So 3.5.
I'm going to disagree with you here. I think Minnesota is the grittier team.
Really?
And I ranked them a little lower than Minnesota. I gave them a 3 out of 5.
Wow. Okay. So speed, I gave them a 3 on 5. 6 guys with over 30 takeaways this year. But to me, They're one of those slower teams in the NHL. But hey, we saw that they can compete at a faster level. They did take out Chicago, right? So 3 on 5.
I gave them 3.5 for kind of the same reason. There's times where they've looked really, really fast, and other times they've looked a bit slow. So I kind of went right in the middle at 3.5.
So for overall experience, I gave them a 3 on 5. St. Louis has had some amazing lineups over the last few years, but they just can't seem to get out of that hurdle, of going out in the first round or the second round, that sort of thing. So 3 on 5.
I gave them 4. St. Louis has made the playoffs very frequently over the past, I don't know, maybe 8 years. And even though they haven't really gone far in some of those years, I feel like their experience is pretty wealthy. And so for that reason, I give them 4 to 5.
So in total, I gave St. Louis an 18 out of 30. So the exact same as Minnesota. Got there a little differently, but totaled up to the same, 18 on 30.
And I totaled for St. Louis 19.5 out of 30. And so if we compare the two, I had 22.5 for Minnesota and 19.5 for St. Louis. You had 18 for both. Who wins this series and in how many games?
Now, here's something very surprising. I actually predicted Minnesota to win this series, and I think it's going to be the upset and the big talk in the West, and I think Minnesota is going to do it in 7 games.
Wow, well, our reasoning is a little different, but the end result is the same. I believe Minnesota will win this series in 7. I think it's going to be a very tiring, very hard-fought series for Minnesota, and if they make it to the second round, I'm worried about them, but I think they will.
I'm already a little worried about them. I honestly didn't think they'd be doing as well as they are at this point. I'm really proud of them, but I almost feel they overachieved a little bit. I would have never predicted them to finish at this position at the end of the season, so kudos to them.
Yeah, definitely kudos to Minnesota. They've had a great year. We're not the only person who made a prediction. My dad chimed in too, so let's check out his video.
The Minnesota Wild and the St. Louis Blues. Minnesota, hugely a successful team throughout most of the regular season, with a slump in the last little while. Devin Dubnyk's numbers have been poor in the month of March, down to I think sub 9, but he's still a 9.23 for the year. So even after a slump, he's got some pretty good numbers. He can bring it back and do quite well. Minnesota was an elite team for most of the year. The ingredients that made Minnesota great are basically all still around. So Minnesota has the potential to be the kind of team it was during most of the 2016-2017 season. St. Louis, they have good opportunities here now that they've got the coaching change. Under Yo, for instance, Jake Allen from Fredericton, New Brunswick, is 10-2-2, which was far better numbers than he was putting up prior to the coaching switch. So St. Louis has found something in the last little while, and if they can bring that something to the season or to the season end and now on to the playoffs, it could give Minnesota quite a bit of trouble. I actually hope I'm wrong here because I want St. Louis to go deep, but I think Minnesota still has the edge here. I'm going to call this Minnesota in 7.
All right, you've heard from us all, myself, my dad, and Justin. All our predictions. Let us know down below who do you think is going to win this series and in how many games. We definitely want to know that. I forgot to say that in the last video, but we always want to know your predictions here. I hope you like this video. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We love seeing new faces in the comment section and on the channel. If you like the video, hit the like button, and otherwise, we'll see you in the next video. Adios.
That sort of thing. That sort of thing. That sort of thing. That sort of thing. That sort of thing.